English it's 5.
Can I share the screen? Yeah.
Yes, Prof. Yes, sure. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyil ameen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Honorable Professor Dr. Syed MUSA ALHABSHI, our guest speaker today, my respected brothers and sisters, distinguished guests. First of all, we would like to welcome you all to this special session on issues on governance of Islamic financial services will be conducted by Professor Dr. Syed MUSA ALHABSHI and arranged by Nadil Iqtisad al-Islami bi Jamiat al-Kuwait. As you all know that the Islamic Economics Association of Kuwait University promotes Sharia-compliant finance frameworks and models by conducting lectures, talks, workshops, trainings in English language and also in Arabic language, which covers a wide range of Islamic banking, Islamic microfinance, Islamic insurance, Islamic capital market, Islamic equity market, the features and Sharia principles of Islamic finance, the nature of contracts and products, services provided by Islamic banking as well. We also focus on arranging series of lectures and talks on some specific topics, including sukuk, retail and corporate banking products, and practical contemporary issues, and so on. So today we are very much honored to have Professor Dr. Syed MUSA ALHABSHI, who is a prominent figure in the field of Islamic banking and finance. Prof has served as Dean of International Islamic University Malaysian Institute of Islamic Banking and Finance, IIBF, for many years, and also has held various academic positions since 1994, including head of accounting department in IIUM, head of postgraduate Islamic Banking and Finance in IIUM, and head of the Center of Postgraduate Studies in UNITER University in Malaysia. And he was also the Dean of Faculty of Business Administration at the University of UNITER, Malaysia, and Dean of Graduate School of Business in the University of Uni Razak in Malaysia. Prof. Habshi, as an academic, has served both public and private universities for about 30 years, period of teaching and research and supervision of postgraduate students in accounting, business administration, and also Islamic banking and finance. So we are very much honored to have Professor Dr. MUSA ALHABSHI, who is also Associate Professor in the International Islamic University in Malaysia, Institute of Islamic Banking and Finance, to conduct the lecture on issues on governance of Islamic financial services today. So this is my honor to welcome and invite Professor Doctor to conduct the lecture. Please, Prof.
Right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashraf anbiya al-mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for this opportunity to have a discussion, conversation, maybe engagement with the Kuwait University and particularly the Sharia Islamic Studies and Islamic Economic Association community. My first encounter was with a person who graduated from Kuwait University. I don't know whether you know Dr. Muhammad Daud Bakar, an international renowned scholar now. I mean, we have been together for some time, and he always talked to me about Kuwait. And today, I get a chance to share a session. And also, I had a chance to drop in Kuwait some time ago, of course, many years, for a short visit when I was covering the Gulf area to discuss about graduate programs. So Alhamdulillah, we will be able to meet and discuss, inshallah, on a very important topic. Except that when I was preparing this topic, I wasn't very sure the nature of the audience. So I keep the topic as broad as possible, and I will raise the issues as we go through the outline of the presentation. And when necessary, if you feel that you want to stop me for discussion, I'm okay, I'm fine. How much time do I have, Dr. Muhyiddin?
It's like 1.5 hours, including question and answer.
Okay.
So
okay.
Yeah, you can either take the questions and questions during your lecture
during the
or
sessions.
maybe at the end of the session.
Sure. Right. Thank you very much. Okay, the topic issue on governance of Islamic financial service. Now, the challenge has always been since I first introduced to the governance standard of EOFI. At that time, I was in the EOFI board, Accounting and Auditing Standards Board, where we were discussing auditing standards, and then Prof. Rifaat Karim says, why don't we look at Sharia board and Sharia review, and then came out another set of standards, governance standard for Islamic financial institutions. So since then, there was a lot of discussion about governance of Islamic financial services, in addition to audit. And of course, it has gone significantly until today. We also have a concept called Sharia audit and Sharia review, which later on I will try to cover and discuss them accordingly. So what happened actually, if you look at the background of Islamic banking, we make certain jumps, certain leaps, and then we go back, review again, because there was actually always an urgent need by the industry to solve problems and come up with solutions. And some of these solutions are adapted or adopted from existing framework. Now, this is the point that I want to highlight. And along the way, I think if you are very much familiar with literature, especially with Islamic economics, all right, you can see that there were phases of the development of the discipline where the early, shall we say, adopters or the innovators, if I can use the word, are the Islamic economists or the Muslim economists. All right, and then slowly the finance people picked up, and then the Sharia actually provide the gear to speed it up, and we have moved so fast and so far. However, even after having said that, there are still certain gaps, all right, certain areas that we need to revisit, we need to relook again, because the drive has been so fast, all right, and at the same time the gaps may get bigger and bigger. So first of all, let me give you an outline what I'm going to cover. Okay, this is broadly the outline, but along the way maybe we can change and move to which one is more important. The first thing that always bothers me is the definition of finance itself, and what do we mean by Islamic finance? And of course, if we extend further, we talk about financial services. Then of course, we look at what do you mean by financial services? What are the types of financial services? What will be the importance of governance relating to these services? What are the governance framework and models? And what is the concept of trust that we are looking at? And what are the issues relating to regulation and governance, and particularly governance of Islamic financial services? And then, of course, as I go through this, I will then later on at the end of this session summarize the issues of governance in Islamic finance and financial services. So I hope you bear with me. Some of the topics may sound to be very basic, but actually it's the very basic questions that sometimes we have to raise. Now, when we describe about finance, all right, most of us will say, okay, it is a body of knowledge. And we will say, well, it covers certain areas. And the one that was popular, if you could remember those who teach finance and back in the 60s, financial management was the key subject. All right. Later on, we translate into corporate finance, we go into investments, financial markets, all right, and then finance begin to take the ambit of all these areas. And of course, now as we are talking, we are focusing on financial services and financial institutions. Now, the thing that is now emerging more important is social finance. Right? You can see now people are talking about social finance or Islamic social finance. Now we are moving very fast, but sometimes we have to ask ourselves, is it social finance or is it social welfare that we're talking about, right? And sometimes it doesn't seem to be a nice fit if we just try to put everything together. Then of course there are areas of development finance that we talk about. Now the point that I'm highlighting here is when we define finance, what do we actually mean? Right? Are we talking about just the products and services, Islamic financial product and services, or are we talking about something more than this? Right? So here is where we go back to what are kind of finance decisions that we make. All right. In fact, yesterday I just finished my executive program with a public bank to complete with them and say, look, how important is your shareholder value when you talk about finance as compared to your customer value? All right. So obviously, without customer value, there's no shareholder value. But most of the time, when we talk about finance, we talk about shareholder value. But we have to realize that customer value is just as important. And today, as we discuss about Islamic financial products and so on, financial information that is captured and conveyed to the customers are even more important than financial information that is captured and conveyed to the investors. So this issue of value creation in finance, all right, becomes even more important when we talk about shareholder value. Of course, now we expand further and we talk about stakeholder value, all right? So when we discuss about governance, for example, do we just concern only about the creditors and shareholders as we see in the Anglo-Saxon model? Or do we take a much more European model and see, well, let's look at a broader view, okay? So these discussions sometimes are not adequately addressed, and I think we need to spend more time to look at it. And of course, later on, we'll touch more on Sharia governance. So so how do we actually see value in finance? Now, I just have a question, maybe some of you would like to respond later on, is finance arbitrage, all right? Is finance arbitrage, all right? I think you understand what arbitrage is, when there are two equilibrium positions, and as a result of that, there will be some kind of efficiency. Now, whether is it efficiency or whether is it opportunistic behavior? I think this is the question that we always have trouble, all right? So when we discuss about finance, all right, most of the time, the arguments for having financial institutions, the arguments for having financial markets, all right, and whatever have you, is always on efficiency arguments, all right? You can do it more efficiently with the market, or you can do it more efficiently with efficiency. Of course, here efficiency can be expanded to discuss various types of efficiency, whether it's a technical efficiency, allocative efficiency, productive efficiency, and so on. But or even price efficiency, as we talk about valuation. But is it really about efficient, or is it opportunistic? Okay. Now, if we want to talk about governance, naturally we're going to talk about ethics. Okay, this is why I raised the issue of ethical problem of finance. So we have a lot of criticisms. That says, well, it is Islamic finance, but it's much more expensive. All right, it doesn't seem to address the needs of the society. I mean, do we miss something in Islamic finance? Although originally that was what was intended. I mean, Islamic economics have got a whole literature on it. All right, and that gives this emphasis. So this question of a lack of attention, if I may say, or reference to what actually are we trying to do when we discuss about efficiency. I do not discount the fact, okay, the importance of when we talk about Islamic finance, what comes next will be juri, gharar, all right, or maisir, all right. And then we also talk about permissible and so on. It is fine, it's very good, we need all those. But have we asked the fundamental questions in finance itself, all right, when we talk about efficiency? So these are questions that we raise and we have to address through our distribution mechanisms or our packaging in our financial services. So what brings us next is it sufficient just to talk about efficiency? Or do we go into equity as well? Right? Now we notice that there is a movement, significant movement to say, okay, let's move to mudaraba and musharaka, right? Which is fine, right? I mean, we are looking at a spectrum of contracts, a spectrum of possibilities to solve the problem, which is great, right? We should not reduce or limit to just exchange contracts, just focus on markup and so on, but we want a much broader perspective. But is it a nice fit, or do we have some challenges when we want to bring in this? Does it actually solve the problem of opportunistic behavior where it is adverse to one party, or does it exacerbate it? Does it make it worse? All right. But of course, at the same time, we always talk about equity and of course, equitable distribution, and we reflect this in profit sharing or profit and loss sharing. But at the same time, we cannot also forget there's also an importance of fair dealing, right? Because in an exchange contract, if it is not a fair deal, then implicit there is also an issue of usury and riba. So the point that I'm highlighting here is the core of governance itself is the ethical problem, right? Is the ethical problem of finance. All right. In fact, later on, I will show you a list of theories, but the one that most of us, I think, are exposed to is the problem of agency theory. All right. So agency theory, is it there? Yes, it was. Is it still now? Yes, it is. And will it be in the future? It will also still be there. So the question is, how do you manage it? And what were our assumptions when we address this agency theory? And is agency theory present also in Islamic finance? And how do we deal with it? So I think these are some of the questions that I hope we can think about, probably we can discuss. Now, there are ways of addressing this. I mean, sometimes you say we need a more effective governance, we need a more transparency in market discipline and so on, which I get myself involved in one of the IFSB standards relating to transparency and market discipline. And obviously there is information content, and this is supposed to facilitate. Now, some prominent definitions of Islamic finance. Okay. Now we have I can see from various books, I have made some references, of course, subject to further update and probably more comprehensive definitions. We either focus on structure in many respects, or roles, or certain features. Now, this has been our tendency, right? To take certain aspect and then we discuss it from that aspect. And most of the time, we want to make it distinct so that we can distinguish from conventional finance, right? But what I like to suggest is something a little bit bigger, all right? Something that looks at our behavior itself, all right? And something that relates to the deen, all right? Our belief, value system, and so on, or our worldview, as some scholars would like to look at it. So how does Islamic finance actually reach to that? Or is it separated, all right? Or is it disconnected, all right? So again, how are we guided by it? Okay, are we guided by the Sharia? And is it sufficient just by the principles and rulings? Is it sufficient just to focus on product, instruments, and services? Or do we need to have a comprehensive regulatory and governance framework? So you can see that during the evolution, the evolvement of the Islamic banking, we actually take it step by step. We start with the product. My first encounter back in 1994 when they invited me, I'm not trained in Sharia fully. I was just exposed to Sharia, but they need my input in terms of accounting at that point in time, as I had helped out TOFI with some of the standards. So they say, okay, why don't you look at the accounting aspect of the product development, for example, of the Islamic financial? So I say, okay, fine. Then I realized that, well, you can't mix everything. You have to have a separate set of accounts. You have to monitor this, and you have to ensure. So the issue of a holistic approach to product development becomes so important, so critical. Rather than just say, okay, don't worry, we just have a Sharia department, and then the rest we can outsource to the other department. Now, you're going to have a problem when the others are not connected or related to the important. So the question that will come back is, so when we discuss about governance itself, all right, and we say, I want to govern Islamic financial services, do we see Islamic finance from a comprehensive perspective? Or do we just say, oh, we just govern the product, that's it. Don't bother about the people. Don't bother about the overall strategic objective of the organization. Because this brings me to the next question about governance. Now, when we talk about governance, most of us makes reference to corporate governance, okay? Because OECD came out with the document some time back, and everybody's quite happy. In fact, just an hour ago, I had a good discussion with an OECD representative to discuss about financial literacy and financial education. Apparently, they have spent time and work on it for the past 20 years, right? But we don't seem to be connected to it. Now, myself personally, I was part of the association of the Islamic Finance Educators Association. We have been talking about financial education, but we never seem to be connected. with the global community. And I think today and moving forward, inshallah, we will take a bigger role. So the point that I'm trying to highlight here is, when we talk about governance, what is it that we govern? All right. So I started by saying that, are we just governing the product, or let's look at the institution? Now, when we look at the institution, right, or when you institutionalize the activity, then you're going to have again another area of discussion in terms of what is this institution all about. Now, initially, we start with a very nice IFI, we call it, or Islamic Financial Institution. But you will understand very well that within the regulatory framework, all right, where you have a licensing regime, all right, you can't just open a bank without a license. So obviously, the regulatory regime will actually specify what is an Islamic financial institution, what is not. But if you look at it from a behavioral perspective, there's more to this, just regulation, right? There is about how this institution is doing, right? So coming back to Islamic financial institution, here I've make it specific to a full-fledged license by specific legislation and governed by framework. So you can actually see the identity of the institution as such, all right? Whether is it from the board, the shareholders, and so on. So when we discuss about governance of the institution and the financial services, we are aware to what extent this institution can actually perform. This institution can actually execute what is expected from Sharia. Now, if I take from a much broader perspective, then we say, okay, governance of institution offering Islamic financial services. Now, this opens up actually a Pandora's box. All right, you say it could be any institution that conduct Islamic financial services. Now, this is from a global perspective, and IFSB use this term. IFSB use IFS, all right? Individual countries tend to use IFI, but IFSB use IFS. So it gives a much broader spectrum. Now, when you have that kind of a situation, then you realize that when you talk about governance, you're not only talking about the entity per se, you could be talking about just the subsidiary, or you'll be talking about just the windows, or in my case, I've been now advising Bank of Tokyo for some time now. We are talking about international currency business unit, which is just a unit which enters into deals. Okay, so the accounting, the governance, they are different. Okay, of course the focus is still the same, right? But you cannot expect a governance of a unit to be just like a governance of a full-fledged bank, right? So this is where the variation arises. Now, if we move to the next 2 points, which is development financial institutions, all right, or social financial institutions. Now, sometimes we tend to be guided, all right, by the IMF documents. We tend to be guided by the BIS documents or the Bank of International Settlement documents, which actually define what is a bank. All right. Now you'll notice that deposit-taking institutions, right? This term that is used is very crucial. All right, for you to distinguish the actual role and how governance actually takes its form. So, coming back to the types of financial institution services, we can see that we need to be sensitive. All right, to not only the services but also the structure, the capacity that provide those services. So I hope this helps to explain why this is important for us to consider when we discuss about issues on governance of Islamic financial services. Right. Shall I continue, Mahidin, Dr. Mahidin, or it's okay?
Yes.
Is that question? Yeah?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. The other thing that I like to highlight, this actually came about some time ago when I presented in one of IFSB conference. At that time, I was looking at the optimality or the trade-off between regulation and governance. Simply said is, to what extent do we regulate or to what extent do we govern? Okay, so this fundamental question, all right, is important because at the initial stage of the development of Islamic banking or Islamic financial service, how it will be, it will stifle, will affect our innovative prowess. We will not be able to come up with as creative or as new products as we want. will tend to align to the stable, which is actually happening now. Okay, we have some serious challenges when we talk about the investment account. I'm sure you're familiar with the profit sharing investment account and what is its state today. All right. Now, the components that I highlighted here, okay, relate to the question of trust, for example, whether is it public, whether is it private, whether is it stakeholder. And it also covers the area of the agency that we talk about, the opportunistic behavior, the organizational structure, whether is it external or internal, is it statutory or social disclosure that we are looking at, especially everybody's talking about CSR now and it's taking SDG into consideration, right? So a lot of developments there, and we talk about SDG and Maqasid Sharia and so on. Or is it just performance? And again, the trade-off between liquidity and profitability and so on. So all these are very important aspects. And whether you regulate more or you allow governance. So when we talk about regulation, right? If I can go to the next slide, right? When we talk about regulation, we tend to focus more on supervision. All right. Now, there is also what we call regulatory overload or standard overload. All right. When you just have too many rules, right? And then finally, what happens? The organization are just choked and say, okay, let me take the easy way. I'll just stick to the simple products. There's not much development. Okay. On the other hand, if you leave it to governance, then you depend significantly on disclosure, okay, which is transparency. Of course, transparency, I think everybody say we like to be transparent. But what is the fundamental relationship of transparent, all right? It goes back to the relationship between the investors and the management. But now we also have the Sharia board. Now we also have the investment account holders. The relationship is different, all right? And the kind of disclosures will be different. So naturally, we need to look at this again. Now, this is just some highlights that I captured some time ago, and I think this could be updated further. We talk about how systems have evolved. Some using single system, some use dual system. Like in Malaysia, for example, we have actually a dual banking system. All right, although we have a single financial system, but we have dual legislation. All right, and if you look at our legislations, there are additional sections that are being added. Some countries, like in Dubai and so on, you have a single legislation, but you have basically specific guidelines for Islam. So the question is, we have experimented this across different jurisdictions, and these are also important when we talk about governance and the issues of governance, because it varies. It varies with your regulatory or an approach. And then, of course, there are also countries that are more banking-centric, and there are countries that are more capital market-centric. I think when you start looking at policy documents, you can see that these infrastructures are very important before you can actually embrace certain standards. Now, the other point that I want to highlight a little bit more about governance is many of us realize, or whether we don't realize, that when we discuss about governance, we tend to talk in a very high level term. And I always ask this question: how is this connected to concepts like management and administration? All right. Now, in finance, I can share with you, if you are doing financial management, all right, most of the time your focus will be on the behavioral aspect, which is the planning, organizing, directing, control, and so on. Right. So it's very behavioral. So whatever theories that you're going to explain will be very much behavioral theories or institutional theories. But when you talk about financial administration, you are talking about policies. You are talking about procedures. You are talking about rules and requirements. Now I bring in Sharia, all right? Which one is it that we are looking at? Are we looking more towards administration of the law itself, or are we looking at management? Even now, as we are talking, people are talking about waqf and waqf administration and so on, all right? So the nature of the subject matter itself and how we look at it can certainly influence the kind of solutions that we look for. Of course, each has got its strengths and weaknesses, and we know that the literature on management is actually younger than the literature on administration. All right, it came very much popularized by Drucker after that. So this discussion about Islamic finance has been very much management rather than administration discussion. However, when it comes to the policy and law, it goes back to the administration. So both are just as important, but it's just a question of whether we can make the distinction when we discuss about governance, because governance actually addresses both. Now here I have provided a kind of a table for you, all right, which is being simplified, just to do some basic comparison between management and administration. It is not necessarily exhaustive. You can, of course, expand and evolve, but it does tell us something about these two aspects. Now, when you discuss governance from an administration perspective, you will see a lot of external governance issues that is going to come in, all right? So you are very much dependent on the direction of the regulation. But if you start talking about governance from the management perspective, then you always talk about internal control, you talk about the management expertise, the level of integrity, and so on. So you can say the soft and the hard, all right? But both are just as important, yeah? Now, so in the case of Islamic financial services, it tends to be more administration than management in many respects because of its highly regulated industry. Okay, you can go on down this list further and look at them. All right, now I would like to link for you between governance, management, and administration, right? Now, we have the laws, all right? In Malaysia, we even come out with the Sharia governance policy, for example, the SGP document. Previously, it was a framework, and then it became a policy. Now, the importance of governance has always been the top management. The focus has always been top management, the senior management. And in particular, recent developments, 2019, SGP direct governance to the board of directors. Okay. Now, of course, Islamic banking in Malaysia started back in 83. I think in Kuwait back in 70s with Kuwait Finance House. So you have a much broader experience, much extensive experience about the Kuwait Finance House. So the point that we look at is if that is the case, right? What is the status of the board of directors? How engaged have they been? Now, in the case of Malaysia, all right, it depends, right? It depends on the background of the members and to what extent. And the fact that we have a long-standing conventional and now we move to Islamic, right? So there will be a migration of mindset, a migration of views. Now, the approaches that have been taken to date is we have the board members sit together with the Sharia committee members to discuss ongoing issues or outstanding issues, all right? Now, it may relate to management issues. It may also relate to administration issues, right? But certainly, engagement of the board right from the top is most significant when we talk about Islamic financial services industry or Islamic banking. I'm not sure about Kuwait. Maybe later on you could share what involvement. Now, there were, of course, models. When I did a study some time back with IFSB, a survey of Sharia practices across several jurisdictions, and that was before the IFSB standard on Sharia governance was being introduced. Right, we saw a range of Sharia governance practices. Okay, in the sense that there are some countries you don't even have to form a Sharia committee or board because the board members are themselves learned in Sharia, and hence it I would say epitomize a very integrated model. All right, a very integrated model. In other words, the board itself can provide that direction. But from the governance framework, sometimes the question is asked, how independent are they? All right. Now this brings to a further dialogue. Because what happens is another model is you have a Sharia governance, which is separate from the business decision. Okay. So as a result, they can be seen as independent. Now this again, what do you mean by independent and how do we explore and look at this more carefully? Again, goes back to the context, the culture, the framework, and what was it that came about, right? So here I have highlighted some notes for you to make reference, and the key that I am referring to is the trust. Now in my next slide, all right, I just want to highlight certain elements that binds the trust. Okay? You have, for example, the authority itself. Okay, do you have the mandate before you can execute? Okay. And if you have the mandate, all right, then are you made responsible for it? And finally, are you accountable? Now, these three items have got to be there. Now, when we discuss about governance, all right, and if trust is missing, when trust is missing, we can call it trust deficit. That means it's impaired. Then the whole structure of governance basically collapses. All right. So I'm using this simple diagram just to highlight to you that the importance of trust, all right, rests on these three items or these vertices, and it has to be properly managed. Of course, in Islam, we know that this is the very reason, or among others, all right, why we are given the right of choice. All right. And of course, the best is to move to the better, which is ikhtiyar. So the choice or the decision making that we talk about, all right, is so crucial even in Islamic financial services. All right, conventional financial services has got its relationship. What about Islamic financial services? All right, and the language of this trust is actually accounting. Okay? In fact, I've got other slides which I usually describe accounting as the language of accountability. And that's because of my background. My background is very much business accounting. Now, next is just to relate to you, all right, how important this trust is within accountability itself. Now, our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our exemplary model and character, is something that we always go back to. Some of the attributes are so clear and so profound that even today, as the accountants speak, right, they have to speak the truth. Otherwise, the financial statements are not true and fair. Okay, so the concept of truth, right, has become so expensive that it is included in every aspect of human life. Now, if this is not safeguarded by governance, then I think we miss the whole point. Okay, some of us can say we are transparent, but we are not honest because in the first place, we're not true. All right, and you cannot be fair unless you are true. All right, that's why it's very interesting. You see, in accounting, they say it's true and fair. All right, in order for it to be fair, you have to be true first. Right, so you are true to oneself, and then of course to be fair to others. Of course, then comes to the next issue of the amana, which is the trust, and then the conveying of the message. We talk about transparency, disclosure, and so on, which is tabligh, and of course the wisdom. Okay, when do you disclose? Who you disclose? At which point? All these are very significant attributes. Then at the end of the day, what do we hope to achieve? Okay, ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar. Now, and tu'minuna billah. So these are actually built in already. It's just a question of can we realize it? Can we communicate it? Can we make it more impactful? And the other concept that I feel very important is qawiyun amin. We talk so much about competency with integrity, but we never relate to Prophet Musa alayhi salam and how actually qawiyun amin was very much mentioned in the Quran. And this is so integral. And if we talk about governance without this, then I think the governance will collapse. Even you have the best structure, the best law, the best mechanism. What will be the driver to this? So, of course, among other things, we have the Sharia principles and rulings. Then what's next? The professional standards. What's next? The regulatory requirements. Okay. So all these are very integral. Okay. But as we discuss about governance today, what do? Do we just stop at compliance? All right, which is the third one, or do we go all the way up? Now, this is the point that I want to highlight here, all right, emphasizing the importance of accountability in Islam and particularly in governance. So we go back to the question of, in governance, if we regulate, then the question is why regulate? Now, a simple discussion, I think some of you are familiar with public-private good, right? And of course, in economics, we always talk about scarcity and choice. Now, when we talk about public good, right, then obviously we have public interest. So the next question is, do we safeguard this public interest? And how do we safeguard it? Of course, we have various mechanisms. So the same apply to governance itself, all right? So when we talk about governance and we say, well, this is not just the shareholders, but these are public investors, all right? They're not just private shareholders. So obviously the expansion has increased. So the challenge, all right, about regulation itself goes back to the nature of what that we want to govern, goes back to the understanding that is this a public or private interest? Do we need a public policy? Do we need to regulate? What if we don't? Then how best do we address the problem? Do we leave it to the market to decide? Right, now I move on to some points on corporate governance. Now, most of us would have make reference to the earlier documents, all right, whether it's the OECD or the Cadbury report and so on. I leave that to your earlier readings. But the thing that we know you cannot miss is a few things. Number one, you have to have a structure. Second, you must have a process. Third, you need a culture. Now, the structure and process can be very fine, but what could always be missing is the culture. And what is culture based on? Culture is based on beliefs and values. Not only that, shared beliefs and values. So this is actually the one that make it work, or the one that make a difference. So you will see many efforts to implement corporate governance, and yet we have corporate failures. All right, we have corporate, and this doesn't happen once a month. You can see it every week, in fact, alternate days, right? So where is the crucial issue? So in other words, even though we say, oh, it's resolved, we've already got the framework, we've got the policy standard, but the behavior is still something that we have to examine. So the issues remain, and we still need to address. Maybe to a certain extent, it is more contained as compared to before. Now, I've provided further making reference to specific documents that like the OECD Principles of Corporate Governance, all right, or the Cadbury report, right? And these are further summaries or extraction from those for you to make reference to. And if you want, you can, of course, go further. But the point that I have highlighted is we go back to the fundamental, all right? There has got to be a system. Now, if you talk about governance, just by the entity alone, it is not sufficient, all right? Because it has to relate to others, and this governance has got to be communicated. It must be a strong felt need. It must be within the shared community, all right? Otherwise, it will just work only for a certain group of people. But later on, it may have a problem of system failure. So coming back to the importance of having a collective governance and so on is important. So specific definitions of governance are also provided by Basel. Specific definition of governance are also provided by IFSB. But if I introduce and say, okay, I got corporate governance and this is Islamic corporate governance. Okay, I mean, we always quite easily to use the adjective Islamic and say, would that be sufficient and hence doesn't need to have Sharia governance? This is an important question. In fact, the word Sharia governance itself, I think my colleague, Dr. Akram, Prof. Akram, did mention in one of our last roundtable discussion, when the first time he mentioned Sharia governance, he had a lot of resistance. All right, and I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because the understanding of governance is for an entity. So what is the entity? In this case, is corporation. If it is cooperative, we call it cooperative governance. If it is market, we call it market governance. Now we have Sharia. What do you want to govern about Sharia? You see? So it raised questions in terms of the semantic, all right, or in terms of the nomenclature. Now, the same thing with risk, all right? Because today, when we talk about governance, most of the time we talk about three things: compliance, audit, and risk. Okay, compliance, audit, and risk. So now we have Sharia risk. So my question is Sharia at risk? You know, it sounds very funny, right? How can you say Sharia at risk? Sharia is providing guidance. Okay, how can that be at risk? So what was missing was Sharia compliance. So what was intended is actually Sharia compliance risk. So when we talk about Sharia governance, is governing Sharia compliance. Now then, come back to the question, is this a legal issue or is it a Sharia issue? Or is it both? Right? Of course, we continue to discuss this and debate about it, whether the source of it came from the Sharia requirements and conditions, or was it regarding its implementation in terms of documentation, manual, and so on, and instruments or products. So you have an interesting array of matters to handle, but at the end of the day, you just say, okay, this is Sharia risk. But what you actually meant is Sharia compliance or Sharia non-compliance risk. So this actually brings us to the use of the term and to appropriately. Now, recently, if I can share with you some developments that is happening before I go to this item. When we talk about the Sharia governance or Sharia risk, do we see this as transactions or do we see this as an institution as a whole? Now, what happens is, all right, by the time you raise to another level, you will realize that it is not just within the domain of a specific department, but it is an organizational. For example, if you bring in discussion about ERM, all right, enterprise-wide risk management. So you are not looking at operational risk only, you are looking at strategic risk. Okay, you look at the whole organization as a whole. Now, if you put your Sharia goals or you put your maqasid Sharia right at the top to guide your vision and mission of your organization, then we have actually elevated to that level. So in that sense, it is the whole organization that we are looking at, and it's not just individual products or instruments. Okay, so I believe this is important as we progress and we discuss further. Now, this is just to show you the leverage principle. Okay, I use the word leverage, which actually came from physics, where you have a lever and a fulcrum. So what I'm trying to say here is we have a lot of leverage models in our policy documents. All right, we take the corporate governance and then we top up with what is peculiar to Islamic financial institutions. And we say these are our additional products, this is our additional requirements, and we did. But essentially, we still have the same. Now, what happens? Okay. What happens is, if you observe the development of corporate governance, okay, what happens in the development of corporate governance? The development of corporate governance, if you could recall, started with the issue of agency cost and the agency problem. So what is the agency problem? The managers and the shareholders somehow have got a trust deficit problem. Right? So that itself is an assumption that is also tested by other theories like stewardship and so on, whether this truly whole or should this be an exception rather than the norm. But if we take that model, all right, and we say there is a problem between the manager and the shareholders, then what do we bring in? We bring in the auditor, okay, the third party. But we realize that the auditor report to the executive and not to the independent directors. So you form an audit committee, okay? And then later on, you realize the audit committee has got too many things to handle, you set up the risk committee. And now, with so many things that relate to compliance, you set up a chief compliance officer. So you see the thing never ends. All right, finally, you have a C-suite, from the CEO to the COO to the CRO and so on. You have a whole range, you know. But whether we are actually solving the problem or we are getting more complicated. You know, it reminds me, you see, my first job was actually a police inspector. I was in the police force, and at that time I was in Singapore. We had this person or this department that will come to the police station, and even the police are all afraid, and we call that the inspectorate division, right? So this inspectorate division, as I could recall, actually do all the three functions. They do the compliance, they do the audit, they also do the risk, and they also do quality. Today, we need to have 4 departments today. Okay, maybe we can say it is the sophistication, but if we don't have the right people doing the right job, I think we still miss the point. I think this is the thing that I need to highlight here. So even though we have the framework, we have the governance, finally it goes back to some literature says the human governance, all right, the importance of the person itself, whether is it the customer, the supplier, the bank itself, and so on. So if we look at the modalities, All right. So I just want to highlight certain key attributes: independence, accountability, fairness, responsibility, transparency. Okay. This was taken from some literature, and it talks about the captive insurer. All right. Now, if we go down to the governance models below in my table, you can see that it could be just procedural, it could just be corporate, it could be market, it could be network. And of course, this list can extend. This is 2001. Now it's already 2020. 19 years, surely there are more work that has been done. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to highlight is the modalities. Which modality will suit you and how it works best, right? These are some theoretical perspectives, all right? Various theories that have been used, and you can look at them and see how it relates to governance and issues of governance. And you can extend this to Sharia governance if you're doing research papers and you want to explore. And I believe we have to be critical and careful of their limiting assumptions of each of these theories. The one that is quite popular today is the legitimacy theory. Then, of course, we bring in Sharia compliance. How many more minutes do I have, Dr. Mahidin? Yes.
Prof, still you do have about 40 minutes.
40 minutes? Oh, I thought I started at 5:10 or so. No. Okay, I'll try to finish up another 10 because I see a lot of raising hands. Maybe they want to ask questions before they forget. Yeah. Okay, I'll try to continue and share with you another 10 minutes or so, so they have more discussion.
No problem, Prof.
Okay, so when we talk about corporate governance in terms of the approaches, right? I did highlight about whether is it investor-centric or stakeholder-centric. Now, essentially, when we talk about investor-centric, it's very much capital-centric, all right? And I think we understand this very well, where it came from. But if it can be managed well and it doesn't hurt anyone, we continue, right? But on the other hand, right, when situation like COVID-19 now is happening, all right, and we have institutions that can still continue to make profits, when others are making losses and closing down, then I think we have to ask some serious questions, right? To what extent the social responsibility or social impact that we are talking about, or to what extent do we see this institution as part of the organization and society as a whole? So here, when we discuss about Sharia compliance, all right, are we just limiting to the requirements, the condition, the valid transaction, the permissible activities? Or do we extend to the more bigger siyasa, political side of it, the social side of it? And what are the issues that we need to address? And even if we have discussed this in our academic literature quite extensively, right? Have we been able to translate this into practice? Have we been able to bring this to policy development? And would this have benefit from a much broader issues? Now, some guiding principles on Sharia governance system taken up from IFSB, taken up from AOFI standards, and of course they make reference to the Sharia standards, which comes from some of them Sharia resolutions and so on. But the key point that I want to highlight here is, at the end of the day, the governance that we talk about, all right, still have the basic structure of the corporate governance that we understand. All right, although the goals are different, but the mechanisms are relatively the same. And in fact, the internal control is also from there. Now, this brings to the question about Sharia audit and Sharia review. Okay, before I bring into Sharia risk, I did highlight a little bit. Now, the Sharia compliance, as we understand, you can see it here. Just highlight here. Yeah. Now we start by looking at compliance, right? So compliance will be Sharia review, and it is operational. It is regular. The question is, who does it? Okay. There are issues of independence. Would the one who came up with the ruling also do the audit or the review? Or should the one who does the ruling be different from the one who is actually reviewing whether is it compliant or not? And of course, is it referring to the department itself, which is the Sharia department, or is it referring to the other departments? Okay, so all this need to be clearly ironed out. But at the end of the day, we want it to be an independent, objective assessment of the Sharia requirements. Okay, so this brings us to some institutions. They have transferred Sharia review to the compliance department. All right. It is not the Sharia unit that does it, but it's the compliance department. However, the question will be the human capital, the manpower. Do they understand the Sharia requirements? And they still need to be guided. But when it comes to the execution, they can execute it independently from the Sharia. So this is one. The other thing is we have Sharia audit. All right. So who's doing the auditing? Again, we hand it over to the internal audit department if it is an internal, or you pass it to the external. At the moment, most of the auditors, all right, especially in the region that I'm in, are still not ready to assume that role. So the regulatory persuasion goes back to internal Sharia audit. And the internal Sharia audit, of course, will report to the audit committee, all right, and not report to the Sharia committee because there is the grade. However, the communication is still with the Sharia committee. Now, what will be the fundamental difference between these two? Some will say, well, it looks like it is duplicating or replication. You know, we could have just minimized, just pass it to the Sharia audit and they will do both. Actually, they are not. All right, they are not, because one look at the compliance side, whereas the other look at the control. All right. So when you look at the control, your focus will be on the control objectives, all right, rather than fulfilling the requirement. And hence, it's supposed to be supportive. That's why the internal Sharia control system, which was started, I mean, you can see this term being introduced even before FSB with UFI. This term has been introduced to highlight or to alert the need for this objective assessment, all right, within the organization. So Sharia audit and Sharia review actually has a role to play. And in the earlier stage, we didn't even call it Sharia audit. We call it testing for Sharia compliance, audit test or audit a test for Sharia compliance, all right? But of course, now the Sharia audit has become more popular and it has taken a significant role. Now, this is just to share with you in a diagram. Of course, very much Malaysian experience. You can extend this to others. If you have an Islamic financial institution, who are your stakeholders, the investors, shareholders? All right, then you have the regulators, which are in the blue, okay? Whether is it the capital market, the central bank. And then, of course, you have the agencies that come up with the standards. You may have your industry associations, all right, that actually communicate these requirements, whether is it from the central bank or from the agencies. And then you have your range of committees. So as I mentioned, the three key committees are compliance, audit, and now you notice that I put a box here just to highlight that the Sharia committee actually is outside. Yeah, it cannot be part of this because if it does, then it is a board committee. Okay, that's why I put here board committee. In other words, what we're saying here is the independence of the Sharia committee in the Malaysian experience is more independent because they have a direct link to the central bank. Okay, that's why I put here the connection with this Bank Negara Malaysia, the central bank, right? Even if they disagree with the board, right? Of course, these committees are subcommittees of the board, not the Sharia committee. However, the Sharia committee do communicate with the board. Right? So this is at the moment the state of England. Of course, if you are talking about the Sharia Supervisory Board as defined by FSB and TUFI, then it will be a board equivalent to the board of directors that report directly to the shareholders or the General Assembly. Okay, so in that sense, their appointment is more independent because the appointment is direct from the shareholders. In the Malaysian scenario, the nomination committee, all right, review the appointments in consultation with the Sharia, and then of course subject to final approval and endorsement by the central bank. So you see, even you say, well, this doesn't seem to be much, but actually it does tell us a lot, because if you are representing the government, all right, and hence you have public interest in mind, then it has to be reflected. So the Sharia committee cannot say, oh, I'm just representing the shareholders' interest, because it's certainly much more now, because it is representing the national interest, it's also representing the public interest, to be more precise. All right. So if there is a dispute, right, of course that will bring to another discussion about conflict resolution and so on. My colleague Some of them are very specialized in this. Okay, then we have to look at it again. Can actually the Sharia committee represent in a very independent, or are they still very much skewed to the institution that actually engage them? A more independent party to be looked at. So the experience, of course, you may have different. It will be very interesting to see different country experience, different models, to see how we put this together. All right, now I just want to put in one diagram. The central focus of this diagram is actually Sharia compliance behavior. Now, the organs that we have today, all right, and the system that we have today is very much regulation, Sharia board, and corporate governance. Okay, or Sharia committee and corporate. Of course, you have the board of directors. Now, the mechanism, if it is regulation, it will be very much supervision. If it is governance, it's very much discipline. Okay, and of course, you have the legislations and guidelines, opinion rulings, and impact of Sharia review. You have the board, audit committee, governance committees. All this put together, expecting compliance behavior. Now, below that is just to show you the breakdown. What is compliance behavior? Compliance behavior is not just compliance. It also relates to risk. It also relates to audit. So we have not only actual compliance, we also have the issue of potential compliance. And this is reported to almost every month or quarterly, but now, of course, as if on basis, monitored by the central bank, right? So among other things is a deliberation about compliance, plus, among other things, the development of the Islamic financial services. Okay. So if I can come to almost the end, the summary on issues of governance in Islamic finance and financial services. Firstly, we have to look at the issue of the organs of governance. Okay, are they adequate? Are they sufficient? Okay, if I look at adequate, it's very much from administrative perspective, sufficient very much on management. Are they effective? All right, are we having enough? Do we need to do more, or are we duplicating? All right, these are some of the issues that we have. Of course, as we said, agency costs, there will be costs. When you talk about governance, there is governance cost. And how do we optimize? When I raised the earlier question between the trade-off between regulation and governance. Next will be the issue of key responsible persons. Okay, who are those competent and with integrity? They have got to be. Of course, at the moment when we talk about this, usually we refer to the board, we refer to the various organs, we also refer to the to those who are appointed, the board appointees. And this relates significantly to human capital development, right? So what sort of training, what sort of level of competency? So a lot of efforts have been done to introduce professional programs, to introduce academic tertiary programs, and I'm sure Kuwait University has done a lot. You have a lot of seminars on that. Now, would it be the core, or will it be just a periphery? Okay. Myself, personally, I've been involved in this drafting of the curriculum for some time. All right, and we still continue to have challenges. We have one standard, education standard, we call it Muamalat and Islamic Finance Standard, right? But because of the challenges of how institutions conduct this program and where they conduct it, by which department, for example, you have an Islamic finance course that is run by a finance school, business school. There's an Islamic finance course run by the Sharia school. You have finance course run by the social science school. Now you're going to have different focus, different orientation, and we have to adapt and address this accordingly. Because at the end of the day, the graduate of Islamic finance to the bank has got to be quantitatively literate. If it is not, then they are wondering, how come you are in finance, right? But obviously, all right, Islamic finance has taken a much broader role, and this needs to be explained into which functions and roles that they play in the organization, all right, and from where they graduate and what kind of services. Otherwise, there will be a problem. We had problems like I put someone with the Sharia into credit analysis, but quantitatively he's not equipped. Then of course he's going to have a problem, right? So this kind of assessment, this kind of transparency, clarity of nomenclature of the courses, as well as the design and structure is important. Next will be the role of the board. Usually we talk about composition, we talk about balanced board, all right? But again, what is the transition period? We have board members who are just about to learn Islam in practice. Islam as a personal belief, yes, no problem, but Islam in practice, Islam within corporate culture is a new experience for some of them, all right? And I personally had engagement with some of them, and we share a lot. At the same time, of course, the acuteness of the board, the acumen of the board is something that we learn and we benefit. And then again, fit and proper will come in, integrity and competency. The next issue that will always be a polar will be Sharia committee. We talk about Sharia independence of Sharia committee. Yes, within a jurisdiction, but not necessarily global, because they sit on so many boards and they are being represented. Of course, now the onus is on them in their scholarship position and how they observe proprietary information and confidentiality, and we trust them. Okay, but what happens when there is a break? Then, of course, the system comes in, all right, to address this issue. But will the system actually solve? Because at the end of the day, it goes back to, as we've said earlier, is the people. Right? It is the education, it is the responsibility, it is the accountability that comes in. Next will be the Sharia control functions that I've highlighted to you in terms of compliance, audit, and risk. They are interrelated. One is at this time, which is compliance. One is the past, which is audit, and one is future, which is risk. So actually, they are looking at the same thing in different timeline. Okay, in different timeline. So if you go into the risk department, always you have to think forward. If you audit, you always review. And of course, if you're in compliance, what is happening now? Now, this mindset actually is very crucial, because otherwise we'll have a problem in terms of anticipating or correcting or making improvements. Then Sharia risk, I highlighted again, whether is it operational or is it strategic, all right? Now, if we can raise it to strategic, then we can do a lot of prevention. In fact, the direction itself can avoid. But if it's just operational, then it is reduced to a middle management level, all right? There's not much you can do except more on compliance and compliance avoidance, non-compliance avoidance. Then the last point is from a broad perspective, which at the end is our focus. Is it human? Is it corporate? Or is it social governance? Right? So naturally, today as we talk, we are moving to the third one. Okay? Islamic Bank will be evaluated in terms of social governance. To what extent do we fulfill the needs of the society today? To what extent do we promote mutual respect, mutual recognition, mutual trust, mutual benefit? All right, or we still that functional. We still say, oh, we have to make profits more than anything else, or is it we bring public good and then we share the profit, not make the profits and then we share whatever that is left. All right, so it's going to be a paradigm shift. Okay, when we talk about social governance and we talk about social enterprise. So some concluding remarks. So governance actually has evolved to address ethical norms and values as well as issues from various theoretical perspectives and institutional approaches. Okay, you can see the various models, you can see the various theories, the various explanations that we have. But at the end of the day, the question that we ask, are these developments significant? And what are the spin-offs? How do these affect Sharia governance? And what is the direction? Okay, especially for Islamic financial services. Or shall we take a much broader as we start talking about social finance? You see, some literature talks about social finance and they discuss about zakat, they discuss about sadaqah and so on. But we have to be mindful of the fact that the word finance itself has a specific connotation. The one that we are familiar previously is social welfare or social welfare distribution, where it is the right of the vulnerable, the right of the less privileged to do. Well, you don't finance it, because if you finance it, you only create more problems. Right? So there has got to be a clear distinction. In fact, if you can see in the background, we'll be having our conference next week, inshallah, on Islamic financial literacy. All right, and I hope if you are available, you can still join us. I think to attend is still open, and you're most welcome. If you want to present papers, I think that the date has closed maybe the next conference, or we can discuss about future seminars together with International Islamic University. Next will be the relationships. I talk about the relationships, right? So most of us will begin with statutory, okay? Basically top down, what the regulator wants us to do. Then we talk about our relationship with the board, with the management, with the customer, and then we move on to contract relationship. So each relationship needs to be governed. Each relationship has got to be addressed. So governance actually is to care. Now, what is embedded within this relationship is the trust. Okay, the trust that we talk about. And finally, it talks about customer, shareholder, stakeholder value, because that is the output that we are looking at the end of the day. Right? So Sharia governance of Islamic financial services should be directed to, of course, maqasid Sharia, right? The broad goals of Sharia, which is very much related to the various, whether is it necessity, whether is it what you need, and whether it is that will beautify, as well as comply to relevant principles, rulings, and requirements. So I think this is about all I could share today. And I think while I'm sharing, I'm sure I have made some mistakes or maybe some errors. I seek forgiveness for any of my shortcomings of my presentation. And I'm here to listen and also learn from you. And hopefully we can have more engaging discussion. All right, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much, Prof, for your wonderful presentation. And we hope that the topic has been brilliantly and excellently discussed and presented by Prof. SYED MUSA. So نشكر للأستاذ على كل شيء قدمته لنا ما شاء الله في هذه الدورة والمحاضرة وجعله الله في ميزان حسناته إن شاء الله. So Prof, we would like to open the session for question and answers.
Yes.
So you can see there are, mashallah, some of the lecturers and professionals from many countries joined the session. We thank you very much for your participation and attendance here today. So we just wait for your question. Either you can write your question in question and answer section, or you may raise your hand. We switch on microphone for you, so you can speak, and Prof. SYED is here to answer, to comment your question or remark, inshallah. So we can see here one Galaxy M21. I'm not sure what is the name. Please, I switch on microphone for you. Galaxy M21, please. You raise a few times your hand, so we are willing to listen to you, inshallah. Galaxy M21, are you there? Okay, let's move to another one. Sister Mona Al-Ramadan, please. Sister, thank you very much. Yeah, we switch on microphone for you. Sister Mona Al-Ramadan, are you there?
Probably the mic, maybe, yeah.
Hello, Sister Mona. We switch on microphone for you, please, if you have any question. Okay, let's see Mash'al Al-Nazi. If I'm sorry if I misinterpret your name. Mash'al Al-Nazi.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I am new in Islamic club, and I am so happy, and it was a very useful club. And I want to ask you about what's different between Islamic economic and another other sectors. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, the question is again.
what's the difference between Islamic economic association and other economic not Islamic يعني another region? Thank you.
Okay. Islamic economic institution. Oh, I wish my colleague Prof. Aslam is here to help me. You know, he's the Muslim Islamic economist. Okay, my understanding of an economic institution, all right, which upholds the principles, the Sharia principles, all right. The reason, okay, let me go back one step to respond to you. We form an institution because we can't act individually. We have to act as a group. An institution itself take different forms, all right. So when you say an economic institution, then it could be a financial institution like what we are talking about. It could also be a non-financial institution, all right. And if it is non-financial, again, it could be capital-centric like company, or it could be community-centric like cooperative, okay. So you can do actually divisions. Now, what makes them Islamic again goes back to the values and principles that they uphold, and they project in their statements and their commitment and their support. Now, some would say, oh, they should be Muslims, right? They don't. We wouldn't include those who are non-Muslims. But the present state as we have today is those who subscribe to the Islamic values and practice as such, then they are. Now, there are those who never even declare they are Islamic, all right? But you see, their practice is very Islamic, right? So again, we will take into consideration. Now, as far as Islamic economic institution is concerned, for now, we look at the broad principles and we see whether they subscribe to these broad principles. I think that's the best I can respond. The details probably we have to look on a case-to-case basis. I hope I answer your question. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. I think we are still waiting for some more questions. Sister Mona is there?
Yeah, Mona raised her hand again. Yeah. Mona has raised her hand.
There is another question, Prof.
Yes.
There are some students from various countries asking like any opportunity or scholarships like in the field of Islamic banking and finance.
Yeah.
So I think you are the most appropriate person in that to advise or to suggest to our students, whoever would like to further study PhD or masters in the field of Islamic banking and finance. So please, if you have any advice for them, how to achieve any scholarships or financial waive or financial assistance, please, Prof, you can suggest to them.
Okay. Thank you for asking that question. All right. Actually, if you ask me, okay, let me explain a little bit about my institute. My institute, Islamic Banking and Finance, is a postgraduate institute. All right. In other words, we take those after completing the first degree to do our masters and our PhD. We just have only two programs: Master Islamic Banking Finance and PhD Islamic Banking Finance. Right. But even then, also we got a lot to do already because it's an interdisciplinary program. Right. So it's an interdisciplinary. There's a lot of fields of study. Now, if you are interested to join, you are most welcome. We are always very happy to have more from different countries because I think now, you know, if you look at IUM is like a mini OIC or even more than that. You know, we have various from this country. Usually what happens is if you are with Islamic finance background and so on, you can come in with some exemptions, okay, with the courses, because some of which you are already familiar. But if you are not, if you are from a certain specialization, you may have to take additional courses not related to your specialization, because we have to make sure that you are balanced to do the program, all right, when you enter our program. Okay. In terms of scholarships, most of them would have joined us before they apply for scholarships, all right, because most of the time we will get sponsors from IDB and also some other agencies. And of course, this will be case-to-case basis. We will obviously recommend. Within our university, we also have some funding for the students. Now, the other thing is, given the present COVID pandemic, all right, and mobility can be quite challenging to come over to Malaysia and so on, we have opened up our opportunities to study from where you are, to be part of our program, all right? So in other words, you don't have to be physically be present in Malaysia, all right? But you can join and be part of our program. But we have our online real-time classes and so on, which I've been doing now. In fact, for the past 1 year, I have been working from home actually, you know, because I have to cross two districts before I can reach my university, and because of these barriers, you know, you have to be locked down, so I have to work from home. So I am actually most of the time connected in different hours. Just like now, this 2 hours ago was with Paris, and now with Kuwait, you know. So it's quite common now to be connected. So you're most welcome. So your cost of study will be only very much related to the fees, right? If you are studying from home. And of course, if you are working, we also run executive programs, which means we will compress some of the modules to give you opportunity to work at the same time, study and do our programs. Yeah, I hope this will be helpful. But please let me know if you are interested. I've left my email on my slides. You can send email and I can follow up for you, inshallah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Prof, for your wonderful and nice advice, and also suggestions and some directions for the students and educators to achieve any financial assistance or any other kind of way to study more, like virtually. And nowadays we are conducting everything. The world has become a virtual world, mashallah.
Yes, a global, yes, connected, yes. Globally
connected. Thank you, Prof. Prof, there are some questions we can see.
Please.
Mr. Faisal, is Sharia governance policies and rules are the same across countries, financial institutions, etc.? What could be significantly different aspect between them?
Okay, thank you very much. When we talk about governance, there is a certain level of standardization, yeah, which means, or convergence. I can use both words, because currently we already got 2 documents, one from EUFI, the other one from IFSB, all right, which outlines the scope, the process, structure, and so on. So to a certain extent, we have common. But what makes it different is the regulation within each country. Okay, because the regulation within each country will deal with the licensing of the banks and institutions. So that's one difference. The other difference will be the school of thought, all right, or the Sharia view that takes precedence. Okay, so some may be much more stringent in certain views, some will be more flexible, depending on the locality, the culture, the people, and so on. So that could be the variation. Okay.
Yeah, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Another question from Brother Muhammad. What could be the fundamental difference between Islamic economics and socialism?
Socialism, is it? Oh, okay. So next time you got to invite a panel, Muhyiddin. I cannot answer everything, but I will try.
Inshallah. We would love to have any kind of like dawra, inshallah.
Inshallah, yes. Yeah. Okay, basically, I am not an expert in socialism, but I do understand that there is a concept called social market economy. All right, a very interesting concept, and I would encourage you to spend time to understand it. Apparently, Germany has done it very well, and they also have social banks. We are only just about to talk about Islamic social bank, but actually they already got it some time ago. All right, when we talk about socialism, okay, of course it is a human ideology, yeah, a human construct. Cannot be compared with Islam, because it is universal, it is aqli and naqli, yeah, it is wahy. So it has to be elevated and bring to the next level. Now there are of course some issues relating to socialism, and of course there are some benefits as well. So what we do is we be more selective. So when we say Islamic economy, actually we want to pick the best model, okay, the best model from the different practices, but not forgetting our divine guidance, Sharia. in the Quran, inshallah.
Thank you, Prof. From Dr. Syed Hashim, Assalamu alaikum. هل الاقتصاد الإسلامي له تطبيقات في أمريكا أو أوروبا? Yeah, does Islamic economics have any applications or like implementation in Europe or in America?
Okay, very interesting question. Whether it takes the form or substance, I think this is the response that I can give to you, right? Now, when I say the form or substance means, it may not declare itself as Islamic economics, but you see all the values and the virtues within the organization. And usually it works very well with their cooperative governance. We see this at work, whether it is their cooperative institutions and so on. Now, in US, I don't know whether you've heard of this organization called, very interesting, La Riba. Okay, it's actually an Arabic word which means La Riba, no riba, right? But it gives a name as La Riba Bank. Now, the only thing about this bank is it's a community-centric bank, and it doesn't raise to the level of financial institutions that we have today. But it works very well serving the Muslim community in US.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. From Rajaha M. Shihab, أنا أسأل حول الأسئلة على المادة العلمية هل مسجلة كفيديو؟ نعم، المحاضرة مسجلة على قناة النادي الاقتصادي الإسلامي في اليوتيوب. إذا بحثتم نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي، قناة نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي في اليوتيوب، كل المحاضرات والدورات مسجلة هناك. فيرجى المتابعة على قناة النادي الاقتصادي الإسلامي في اليوتيوب. Thank you very much. Another last question, Prof. Then we can conclude the session, inshallah. From Muhammad.
So you are translating for me, yeah? The one in Arabic, yeah. Later.
Yes, Prof. Yes. Yeah. She asked either the lecture is recorded in any video.
Okay. I hope you are recording this, right? Yes.
Yes, it's already recorded in the YouTube. It's being recorded in the YouTube.
Okay.
We have channel, Nadi al-Iqtisad al-Islami in Arabic, in channel in YouTube. So our all lectures and also talks and trainings are like recorded in YouTube.
Very good. Alhamdulillah.
So Brother Muhammadu asked, is there another difference between the Islamic governance to another governance without the Sharia board committee? Maybe he thinks like only difference with the Sharia board committee.
Yes. Yeah, very true. I think this is the you see, if you go back to my first few slides, I talk about the problem of ethics. Yeah, the problem of akhlaq. Yeah. Of course, akhlaq will have to come with adab. Yeah. And I always remember this dialogue between Imam Shafi'i and Imam Malik about the salt and the flour. Yeah. You can have the salt, but if you don't have enough flour, it doesn't work. You must have enough. So the adab is actually much more than just the ilm. The ilm is the salt. So the point about the governance, right? I think essentially the governance is Islamic, yeah, because it wants to solve the problem of conflict. It wants to solve the problem of dispute. It wants to make sure that the organization enter into a fair deal and so on, the ethical values. However, when we look at the muamalat principles, the muamalat rules, all right, there are some differences between the conventional law and the Islamic law, all right? So this is where the interest gets more, and we have to address that. So technically, if you ask me, if you say, if there is a fraud in the organization, okay, you have Surah Mutaffifin, right? Wailul lil mutaffifin, tatfif, yeah? So if there is fraud, right? Now that is very clear in the Quran, all right? That is prohibited, yeah? And if governance is trying to prevent fraud, that means it is upholding the values of the Quran, right? There's no issue. But we cannot say the Sharia only interested in the valid transaction and permissible. They should also be interested in the fraud, yeah? Because it is the wider governance of the Sharia in the Quran. So to respond to your question is, even there is no Sharia board because the industry doesn't need it, but if the management, if the board of directors, if the employees embrace these values, you will see governance in Islam working in that organization. That's my response.
Thank you very much, Prof. We are already at the end of the session.
Okay.
So I'd like to thank all the participants, whoever joined with us today around the world from, we can see, more than 20 countries. Lecturers, professionals, and students. We thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you very much.
Thank our management of Nadal Iqtisad Islami, especially Professor Dr. Ala Al-Ubaid, who is the Mushrif Al-Am, Director General of the Nadal Iqtisad.
Please convey my salam if she's not here.
Yes, we thank all the management board members for the wonderful khidma al-ilmiya, al-diniya, for the students and also for Islam, for lecturers and professionals. These are a great thing. So, Prof, before we conclude the session, we'd like to invite you for your concluding remarks.
Okay, Alhamdulillah. I think today is a very memorable day for me to have an audience. But you give me a new spirit. You know, I have to learn Arabic as much. Make dua, inshallah. My next lecture I could deliver in Arabic.
Inshallah,
as far as governance, it is part of our life, and we have to continue to develop it. Wallahu alam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your time, effort, and this khidma. And this is a great thing. We know you since, especially personally myself, since 10 years and more than 10 years. So this is a great thing to have you with us. And inshallah, in future, we will continue to conduct lectures or conference or forums in collaboration with IIBF and IIUM, inshallah. So your cooperation will be highly appreciated with Nadal Iqtisad Islami, inshallah. So with that, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward you, to reward us. Nas'alullah subhanahu wa ta'ala yazida fi ilmina wa fi khidmatina al-ilmiya wal-amaliyya wa ja'alaha fi mizani hasanatina yawm al-qiyamah. Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Then we conclude the session here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Mm-hmm.